There is a number that stops most mothers mid-sentence when they hear it for the first time: 71%. That is the share of household mental load tasks that researchers found mothers carry in a study of 3,000 parents published in the Journal of Marriage and Family. Not 51%. Not a little more than half. 71. And here is what makes that number significant. It is not from a survey that asked people how they feel about the division of labor. It measured what people actually do: the planning, the scheduling, the anticipating, the tracking, the thinking work that keeps a family running. What I want to talk about today is not the number itself. The number is the beginning, not the destination. What I want to talk about is the mechanism behind it. Why the load lands where it lands, what it costs at a neurological level, and why the conversations most couples have about this never actually resolve it. Because by the end of this, you are not going to just have a statistic. You are going to have language for something you have been living without a name for, possibly for years. And the language changes what is possible next. Most people, when they first encounter the phrase mental load, think it means housework. It does not. Physical housework is visible. It can be observed, divided, timed, and checked off. Someone does the dishes or they do not. The floor is clean or it is not. That kind of labor, while real and frequently unequal, is at least legible. The mental load is different. It is the layer underneath the physical, the cognitive operating system that makes the physical work possible. It is knowing that the pediatrician appointment needs to be scheduled before the insurance changes in January. It is tracking that your child has outgrown their shoes before anyone else in the house has noticed. It is holding the location of the permission slip, the date of the school picture, the name of the teacher who needs a thank you card, the fact that you are almost out of the specific brand of something that is the only brand your child will currently accept. None of that is visible. None of it shows up on a chore chart. None of it can be done by someone who has not already been running the operating system long enough to know it exists. And this is the thing that makes it so difficult to name in a conversation. The mental load is invisible by definition. It happens inside a person's mind. It cannot be observed by someone who is not carrying it. Which is why, when you try to describe it, it sounds like complaining about nothing. And why, when your partner says you just need to ask me, they are genuinely trying to help and genuinely missing the entire point. Because the problem is not that you forgot to ask. The problem is that you should not have to be the one who knows to ask. The noticing, the awareness that something needs to happen is itself the labor. And in most two-parent households, that labor is carried almost entirely by one person. The researchers who produced that 71% figure broke the mental load into two categories: core cognitive labor, the daily recurring work of managing a household, cleaning schedules, childcare coordination, meal planning, school logistics. Mothers take on 79% of that. And episodic labor, the occasional one-off tasks like home repairs and finances. Fathers take on 65% of that. That distinction matters, because episodic tasks, by definition, and core tasks never do. Here's the part that most conversations about the mental load leave out entirely. This is not just an equity issue, it is a neurological one. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for planning, organizing, anticipating, and managing competing demands. It is, in other words, exactly the part of the brain that cognitive household labor activates constantly. And research on cognitive load is very clear about what happens when the prefrontal cortex is activated at a sustained level without adequate recovery. Executive function degrades. The capacity to regulate emotion decreases. The ability to stay present, to be in the room you are physically in, diminishes. What that means, in practical terms, the reason you snapped at your child over something small is not because you are an impatient person. It is because a part of your brain that has been running a complex, multi-threaded household management system since the moment you woke up no longer had the resources to absorb one more input without the system losing stability. That is not a character flaw. That is a documented, measurable consequence of carrying a cognitive load that was not designed for one person. And now you have the answer to why you cannot explain it. Mental load is invisible because it is internal, and the invisibility is not incidental. It is structural. The labor happens in a place no one else can see, which means it does not accumulate anywhere that anyone else can observe, which means the person carrying it is left holding both the load and the entire burden of proof that the load exists. The same study that produced the 71% figure found something that should be said plainly. Fathers were significantly more likely than mothers to see the mental load as equally shared, not because they were lying, because they genuinely could not see it. The labor was not visible to them, because visible is not what cognitive labor is. And this is the heart of why the conversation about this so rarely goes the way it needs to go. Two people are having a disagreement about the existence of something one of them cannot see. There is a piece of advice that well-meaning people give to mothers carrying a disproportionate mental load. It sounds reasonable. It is, in practice, a way of making the problem worse. Just ask for help. Here is what that advice misses. When you ask for help with a specific task, can you handle the dentist appointment this week? You have delegated the task, but you have not transferred the awareness. You still know that the appointment needed to happen, you tracked it, you noticed it, you remembered it existed. You just outsourced the execution. The cognitive labor of noticing, anticipating, and managing did not leave your nervous system, it stayed there. And then, because awareness persists, you are now also tracking whether the delegated task got done. This is why the standard advice fails. Task delegation is not load sharing. It is task execution sharing. The operating system is still running on your hardware. What actually changes the distribution is not a to-do list. It is the transfer of awareness. The other person has to become the one who notices, not just the one who does when asked, when reminded, when the list is handed to them, but the one who carries the knowledge that something needs to happen before anyone else has said so. That is a fundamentally different thing. And it requires a fundamentally different kind of conversation. Not, can you do more? But here is the operating system we are running, and here is what is currently running on my side of it. The research on interventions that actually shift the mental load, and there is research on this, is consistent on one point. The precondition for any real change is making the invisible work visible, not as an accusation, as a shared map, because you cannot redistribute a load that only one person can see. This is the reframe. The mental load is not primarily a fairness problem, it is a visibility problem. And the reason every fairness conversation has stalled is that you were trying to negotiate the redistribution of something that had never been named on paper. That is not a failure of your relationship. That is the nature of invisible labor. Here is what I want to be clear about before you go back to the rest of your evening. This video is not a promise that one conversation changes everything. It is not a promise that showing your partner the research produces immediate understanding and a new distribution of labor. Some partners receive this information and something shifts. Some partners need more time, more repetition, more concrete framing. And some of the resistance, and this matters, comes from inside the person carrying the load, not just from the partner. There is a phenomenon in this research worth naming directly. It is called maternal gatekeeping, the pattern where the person who has been carrying the load unconsciously makes it difficult for the other person to take things over, correcting how they did it, redoing what they finished. Deciding it is easier to just do it themselves. This is not a character flaw either. It is what happens when one person has been the expert on the household operating system for long enough that handing over a piece of it genuinely feels like a risk. The standard it has to meet in your head is your standard, and no one else can meet it exactly. Naming that is not blame. It is the other half of the picture. And seeing both halves is what makes real change possible. So here is the one thing. Not a system, not a program. One thing available tonight. Write down, not in your head, on paper, or a screen, every active item you are currently holding in your mind that is related to running this household. Not what needs to be done in the next month, what you are currently tracking right now. Most women who do this for the first time fill an entire page before they are halfway through. And something about seeing it on paper, outside of your nervous system, legible, specific, long, changes the feeling from I carry more to here is what I carry. That is not the same thing as redistributing it, but it is the precondition for any redistribution that actually holds. Because you cannot share a map no one has drawn yet. If you want support building that map and turning it into a conversation that does not become a fight, the mental load mapper in the description is where to go next. It was built for exactly this moment. And before you go, what was the task or responsibility that finally made you realize how much you were carrying alone and had no idea how to explain? Leave it in the comments. I read them, What I want to leave you with is this. The resentment you have been feeling, the one you have been ashamed of, the one that comes back even after you decided to let it go, is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that your nervous system has been accurately reporting the weight of a load that was real, documented, and significant. You were not being too sensitive. You were not making it about you. You were not failing to communicate well enough. You were carrying 71% of an invisible operating system in a brain that was never designed to run that much without the consequences becoming visible somewhere. And the consequences became visible in the moments you have been replaying with shame. That is not who you are. That is what happens when the load exceeds what the system was built to hold. Here is why the number alone does not change anything, and why understanding the mechanism does. When the problem is, my partner doesn't help enough, the only resolution available is a different partner. When the problem is, we are running an invisible operating system that only one of us can see, the resolution is making it visible. That is a solvable problem. It does not require a different relationship. It requires a different map. The parent you are trying to be, the one who is present instead of elsewhere, steady instead of running out of room, there instead of somewhere inside the list. That parent is not on the other side of a version of you that cares less. She is on the other side of a load that has finally been seen. You have been carrying something real. You have been carrying it largely alone. And the fact that you watched this entire video, that you are still looking for language, still looking for a way through, is not nothing. That is the thing. You stayed.